But yeah, so if you get it back today, I'm thinking that I'm going to add 2 extra points to the grade that's on everybody's papers when you do get it back, because there was one question that only one person got. So I kind of felt like maybe I didn't really explain that very well. So I'm going to give everybody points back on that one. So you can add 2 points to the points that you got out of the 75 on the test. That's whenever you get them back. And that'll reflect in the grade book. Did anybody have any questions about anything before I kind of get started? Anything about Monday's lecture? Somebody say something, or I can't really hear. Sorry.
Oh,
I thought I heard something that was super quiet.
oh no, I was handing out a test.
Oh, okay. So just a quick announcement before we get started. I don't know if everybody has seen online the grading rubric for the lab reports, but I did grade the lab reports that were submitted for the first lab. And a lot of them were only like 2 or 3 sentences. And so that is not going to make up a lab report. That's not sufficient to really tell me what you did. Or really show that you put in a lot of effort for the lab report, especially when most students write a page. So I kind of want to go over the rubric for that really fast. Let me do this. So if you go onto Blackboard and you go under assignments, there's a grading rubric for lab reports right here in assignments. And so, can everybody see this? And so, okay. Hold on, I think it stopped when I moved to the other screen. So then if you click on that, it's going to open this grading guidelines for biweekly lab reports. So just have a look at this, and I am going to give you all the opportunity, if you're not happy with your grade on the first lab report, to redo that. So I'll try to go in and make sure that it should still be open for you to just redo it, and then I'll regrade it. But I just wanted to bring your attention to this because I would hate for you to go the whole semester if you haven't seen it and keep losing points on lab reports. So each lab report is going to be worth 10 points. So you just need to make sure that you're giving all of this information. And so then I can give you all of the points. So I'm not going to go through this right now, but just look at it on your own time and make sure that you are giving a pretty descriptive lab report, because a lot of people do put a lot of effort into it. So 3 sentences really isn't gonna cut it. So check the grade book. If you're not happy, redo the lab report, and then look at this from here on out to make sure that you're giving enough information there. Does anybody have any questions on that? Had everybody seen that before?
I've seen it.
Yes.
Okay, so some of you have. Okay, I just want to make sure and give everybody an opportunity to fix theirs from here on out. So just make sure you do that, and if you have any questions, then be sure to email me. So also, if you took the test online, I've graded those as well, so you should be able to see your grade in the grade book. I don't think you'll be able to actually see your exam until after Friday once everybody's taken it. Then you should be able to get in and access your exam and see what you got wrong. And again, you can add 2 points to the grade because of that one question that only one person got. So with that, if no one has any questions, then I'm going to go ahead and start today's lecture. Still working on the PowerPoint shutting down problem because Zoom can't seem to figure out why mine is still having trouble. So did everybody feel okay about the cattle lecture on Monday? Pretty good, no questions? Okay, so today we're going to talk about pigs, which is kind of my favorite. Well, I love cows too. I grew up around cattle, and so cattle are kind of my first love, but since I've been in college and in grad school and then now in my job, I mainly work with pigs, so pigs are kind of like my new favorite, I guess you could say. So remind me really fast, does anyone have pigs at home?
I do. Right.
Cool. Nice. You just kind of like feed them any and everything?
Yeah,
Yeah, they'll eat like pretty much anything. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of check. I thought that was kind of cool. So a little bit about the domestication and the history of pigs. So pigs were domesticated from wild Eurasian pigs, and they were selected for reduced size and manageability, so how easy they were to manage. The first pigs that were in what is now the continental U.S. actually arrived in Florida with De Soto, who I'm guessing is some sort of explorer, in 1539, so pretty early on.
He was an explorer.
Okay, I assumed, but so most farms had pigs by the 17 and 1800s. And in the mid-1800s, production focused in the Midwest along the Corn Belt, and that is mainly where production is focused today. Other than North Carolina, most of pig production is focused there. You still have some pigs in other parts of the country, but the majority of them are going to be there, and then eastern North Carolina, we hope still, even though it just got hit by Florence. But from what I've heard, everybody is doing okay, and the farmers prepared pretty well, so it seems to have minimal losses, which is good. And then there are also feral pigs in a lot of southern states, which I've mentioned before when we talked about feral animals. I know there are some in like southern North Carolina, South Carolina, and then Georgia is a big one too, so those are definitely a problem. And while I'm on feral pigs, another issue with those is that they can actually carry disease. And right now, I don't know if any of you have heard about in the news or anything, but African swine fever is like a huge disease that started in Africa, and it is carried by wild hogs, and it has now gotten to China, and then even some in Europe. And so if it gets here, it's going to be extremely devastating because it's already been extremely devastating in China. And if you remember from your test, China is the #1 swine producing country in the world. So it's a really, really big issue. So these wild pigs, it's not just a problem of them messing up people's land, but they carry disease that can then get to commercial pigs and hurt the food supply. So just a little current issue that's going on with swine. So pigs have 38 chromosomes in total. They have 18 pairs and then plus their sex chromosomes, which you're going to have 2. And their genome has been fully mapped, so that means that scientists have a map of their genome. They know which genes code for which traits and things like that. And there are a lot of different breeds. So in the U.S., there are 8 breeds that are the major breeds that we kind of recognize. And so they're kind of divided into white breeds and dark breeds, which are really easy. Once you see pictures, that will make complete sense. So the white breeds are Chester Whites, Landrace, and Yorkshires. And then the dark breeds are Berkshires, Durocs, Hampshire, Poland China, and Spot. Which really, of all of those, the only ones that I kind of typically hear about a lot are the white breeds and then probably like the first 3 of the dark breeds. So the Yorkshire pig is very important maternal line pig, and so I'll explain what that means in a second, but they're really known for their maternal traits. So they're white in color because they are a white breed, and they have erect ears. So as you can see in the picture, their ears are going to stand straight up. With some of the other breeds, their ears are going to kind of flop over, so that's a kind of good way to tell the difference if you have 2 pigs that are the same color. They're known for their muscle. They have a very high proportion of lean meat and low back fat. So that means they're going to have more muscle and less fat typically. And like I said, they're a good maternal line because they have superior maternal and reproductive traits. So what that would mean would be things like they're good milkers, or they have large litters. They have good mothering traits. So like they don't squish all of their pigs when they lay down. All of these things kind of go into selecting a pig that has good maternal traits and reproductive traits and things like that. Soundness and durability are also another one, and that's extremely important when you're thinking about maternal lines, because if you think about a sow, which is a female pig that's litters, she's going to hopefully be around for, at least probably 3, 4, 5 parities, which is like litters basically. So she's going to actually be in the herd a lot longer than an animal that's going to market. So you want to make sure that she is very sound and very durable, and has good bone structure, good feet, and things like that. Landrace is another white breed that's an important maternal line. They're also white in color, but they have droopy ears. So if you are looking at the 2, you can obviously see that their ears will be a big distinction. And so I've seen these pigs, and some of their ears are so droopy that they literally like cover their eyes like that. I don't know how they even see. So they also have superior maternal and reproductive traits. Like I said, some of those traits are heavy milkers. So if you have a really good sow, like a sow that's milking really well, her pigs are going to be eating really well. They're going to be bigger than if they're on a sow who's not a good milker. So these are all good things to think about. They also farrow large pigs, which is a big deal because smaller pigs are not going to do as well, and a lot of them probably won't make it. So those are really important things to consider with the maternal line breed. So Durocs are a dark breed, and they are the most popular terminal sire breed in the U.S. And so the terminal sire means that they're going to kind of be in the sire genetics. So sire, can anybody tell me what that word means?
Father, right?
Father, yep. So they're going to kind of be on that side of things on the sire line, and they're a terminal sire breed, which means that their offspring are going to end up going to market. So it's terminal. So those animals aren't going to be like bred back anywhere. They're going to market. They're red in color, so they're very easy to tell apart from all of the other breeds because they're really about the only one I know of that's just solid red like that, and they're super cute as babies. They have like a little black nose. And so they're known for their superior growth, efficiency of growth, and durability. And so obviously if they're going to be used for commercial production, you don't really need to worry about those maternal traits for the sire line that's just going to be producing animals for market. You want to go more towards growth. So these are really good for superior growth, and then efficiency means that they can be super efficient at producing meat out of the nutrients that they're given. We're laying down muscle. So they have excellent meat quality, because when we talk about producing animals, you know, there's all the stuff that goes into the production side, but then there's a whole nother world when you get to the meat quality side. So it's not just, animal science isn't just raising the animals to get them to market and then, okay, we're done. It's still, what is their meat going to be like? What happens to that meat? How is it processed and things like that? All of these things that go into meat quality. Like I know people that are just meat scientists. That's what they do. So it's a very specific area. So Duroc have excellent meat quality. So when you're thinking about any breeds that you're going to send to market, you want to look at their carcass traits and their meat quality traits, because that's ultimately what the consumer is going to buy. So if they have poor meat quality, it's probably not going to go very well. And so they can actually add prolificacy and longevity in female lines. So even though they are a terminal sire breed, any females that have their genetics could kind of have a longer lifespan or longer time in the herd than maybe some other breeds. So even though their main traits that they give are growth, there are some kind of underlying traits that can help out with the females as well. So the hamster is another one that I find adorable. It's also a terminal sire breed. And so they're popular in the Corn Belt, which is the Midwestern U.S., where most of the corn is produced, so like Iowa and that area. They're black in color with a white band or belt around their shoulder. So they're pretty distinctive if you see a purebred. But bear in mind that animals that are going to market, any commercial animals, are going to be a mix of a lot of different breeds. So you're not going to really go to like a hog farm and see a pig that looks fully like this. You'll see spots, you'll see different colors, because they're all crossbreeds, unless you're going to a farm that's specifically known for raising that breed. So these are also known for their leanness and their muscling, so because they're a terminal sire breed, so their offspring are going to go to market. They have high carcass quality, which I just mentioned. So that means that their carcass is going to be really, really good. Their meat is going to be good. They have minimal back fat, and they have a large loin eye area. And so basically what loin eye area means is just the size of their loin. So if you think of a pork loin, these Hampshire pigs will kind of have a really, really large one compared to some other pigs. And so if that's kind of something that you're going for, and the loin is a pretty good part, pretty good selling part of the animal for sure, then hamsters are something to consider, because you're getting more meat in the loin. So for pig reproduction, their gestation is 114 days. And so the way that I was always taught to remember it was 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. And I will say that that has kind of stuck with me. Although just a little thing I will say now is that I learned it was 114 days. That's typically the standard. But pigs these days, because of improved genetics, are actually having a lot more piglets than they used to. So it's not uncommon to see pigs nowadays kind of go out to like 116 or even 117. And everyone kind of thinks that's just due to the fact that they're having a lot more pigs, so that gestation length has to be a little bit longer. But so typically, for all scientific purposes, we remember that 114 days, 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. So pigs are polyestrous, and can anybody tell me what that word means?
Many seasons. More than one.
Many cycles. Yep. So that means that they're going to have multiple estrus cycles. So notice that I didn't say that they're seasonally polyestrous. They're just polyestrous. So that means that they're going to have multiple cycles all throughout the year. It's not limited to a specific season. So their estrus cycle lasts about 21 days, and they typically have about 9 piglets per pregnancy, which, again, I would say now that number is probably a little bit low because I'm seeing on average pigs that are having, let's say, at least 14. I've seen some pigs that there's a new genetic line that's just come out that's, of course, crossbred of a lot of breeds that are having as many as 20. Does that mean that all of those pigs are surviving and making it to weaning? No. But sows these days are having a lot more piglets. And that my kind of issue with it is they're having more piglets, but they're having smaller piglets. And then we're having to figure out how to deal with that because people doing the genetics don't always think about what we have to deal with on the other end. They're just in their little computer selecting stuff. So there are typically 2 litters possible per year based on their cycles and their gestation length and then how long it kind of takes them to get back. So typically you want to breed them back within about no later than like 5 to 7 days after they've weaned their litter. So because of all that timing, 2 litters a year is roughly what you're going to get. So on the male side of things, boars produce a large volume of semen with huge numbers of sperm. And so sows should be inseminated 12 to 24 hours after standing in estrus. And so it's kind of that AM/PM rule, which I know that if you watched my beef cattle lecture, I'm pretty sure I harped on that a lot because I remember learning that in intro. And so sometimes I will say, though, I've seen that this can definitely vary by operation. A lot of operations will actually have the boar walk by. And then once the female kind of like stands, it's called standing estrus, and she literally just stands there and locks up. Like you say that, but then when you see it, you're like, yeah, you can tell. And then they'll kind of give her about like 30 minutes or so to kind of let her relax, and then they'll actually go ahead and inseminate her. But they will typically sometimes inseminate twice at different time periods just to make sure that they didn't miss it. So continue inseminating every 12 hours until estrus is over. And that's a big thing because you want to make sure that you actually, hit the right time point. And then, of course, they'll come back through and do preg checks and then decide which ones are actually pregnant. And if not, then they'll try to rebreed. An advantage of artificial insemination, which is what AI stands for. Lots of different advantages. One, the semen has been checked for quality. So you can pretty much hopefully guarantee that at least the semen in that sample are moving and they're of good quality and that you should have a pregnancy coming from that. Other advantages of AI are that if you're a smaller farmer and you don't have your own boar stud, you can order semen from like Smithfield, for example. They have Smithfield Premium Genetics is what they use, and they can actually send semen, and then you don't ever have to bother with having boars that you collect from. So that's another big advantage, and that kind of allows you to choose the different breeds that you're going to have into your herd, even if your sows are just, one breed. So for mammary glands on sows, they typically have between 12 and 20 pairs along the underside from front to rear. I will say that I have never seen one with 20. Typically, they have about 14. 20 pairs would probably be like there's some breeds that have typically without genetic improvements have a lot of pigs. Like there's a breed in China called Michans. They have a lot of piglets, like way more than 20 usually. So those would probably have 20. But we don't really use them for commercial pigs in the U.S. So typically sows that you're going to see here are going to have about 14. And so they're typically going to wean around 12 to 14 because not all of those teats are always going to be functional. And then also you have to think about through each time she has a litter, some of those teats may be damaged. So just because she started with 14 doesn't mean that by her third litter she still has 14. But so just to kind of give you a rough estimate, they typically have between 12 and 20. But in my experience, I've seen most of it.
I have a question about piglet size.
Yep.
So we've been raising hogs since as long as I can remember, before I was born. And I've always heard from my family and stuff that they don't want piglets from first time sows because the piglets are going to stay small. Like the hogs are always going to stay small. Is that true?
So like if they're from a gilt and it's her first litter, her overall body size in general is going to be a lot smaller than a sow that's a couple litters out. So for that reason, her piglets might be a little bit smaller. But also because she is a gilt, they could actually be still in pretty good shape just because she's so young. But I wouldn't say, like, I wouldn't completely discount those pigs, but they would definitely be smaller than, like, a larger pig that's on her, like, third litter because she will have grown in body size a lot. Like, if you see one who it's her first litter compared to one that it's her third litter, there could be, like, almost 100 pounds difference in that animal. And so if you think about how big they are and kind of the space, it's not surprising that gilts have smaller piglets. But I would say definitely, like, I wouldn't say you wouldn't want them, but they would be smaller. Does that answer your question?
But as they grow, would they still be compared to
the other ones?
Would they still be a smaller pig?
Yeah, so typically if they're smaller starting out, they're going to stay a little bit smaller all the way through. Some people kind of talk about like what's called compensatory growth, which is kind of like if they're smaller, they didn't get a lot of nutrients, that they will catch up. But really what I've seen is that there's really only so much they can catch up. And like honestly, when they're born and then at weaning, if they're, let's say, 2 pounds smaller at weaning, by the time they've gone through the nursery, that 2 pounds is going to be translated into probably 5 or 6 pounds lighter that they're going to be than the other piglets. So if they're already a lot smaller, they're not really ever going to catch up. They could still be a very good piglet, very healthy piglet and everything, but as far as their weight, they're not going to really catch up to a bigger pig, from birth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Feel free to stop me if you have any other questions. As you can tell, I really like pigs, so all about the pig questions or any questions in general. So the pig digestive tract is actually very, very similar to human digestive system. So a lot of people don't actually realize that. Like my master's project was actually using baby pigs as a model for human infants and looking at formula. So people were like, why are you using pigs? And they're so surprised that they're actually very, very similar to humans digestively. So they have the mouth here, and then they have the esophagus, which is the long tube that connects the mouth to the stomach, and then the small intestine and the large intestine. And then it's not labeled on the picture, but they also have a cecum, which is right there. So now we'll talk a little bit about nutrition, which I'm going to get a little excited about because I'm a swine nutritionist. So pigs are monogastrics, which means that they have a simple stomach. So if you think back to Monday's lecture on cattle, I talked about how they're ruminants and how they have 4 parts of their stomach, not 4 stomachs, but 4 parts, and how they have a rumen and they ruminate and all of that, which makes them ruminants. So pigs are monogastrics or non-ruminants. Remember, those words mean the same thing. So they have a simple stomach. It doesn't have a bunch of different compartments like cows. They're omnivores, so they can eat meat and plants. As we kind of mentioned earlier, they'll literally eat about anything that you put in front of them. So their feeds must meet nutritional requirements for energy, protein, fats, minerals, and vitamins, just like every other animal. Those are the classes of nutrients that you have to make sure that you're meeting for every animal and for humans. Water is, of course, critically important nutrient for everything, not just pigs. And so you're actually going to feed them based on their stage of production. So this is, again, for like a big commercial operation. Like if you've got a couple pigs in the yard, they'll literally just grow on whatever you give them. But if you've got a large commercial operation with lots of pigs, lots of different stages, you're going to formulate their feed based on different stages of production. And that is because their nutritional requirements will change based on how old they are, based on their size, based on whether they are used for breeding or if they're going to market. So if you kind of target those areas, you can better meet their nutritional requirements. So pigs are typically fed diets made of corn and soybean meal in the U.S., also in other places, but sometimes like in Europe, they might use a little more wheat than we do, and things like that. But in the U.S., it's typically corn and soybean meal. So in order to formulate feed for pigs, you have to have knowledge of their requirements. So what their requirements are at every stage of production, the availability of certain ingredients. So like if you're in an area that's super far away from the Corn Belt, like if you're in, let's say, Arizona, corn may not be as available. So knowing the availability of ingredients that you have for that diet, the quality of those ingredients, because a lot of corn can contain things called mycotoxins, which can be really, really bad for the animal and cause a lot of health problems. Palatability, which means taste. So if an ingredient is something that pigs aren't really going to like the taste of, you need to kind of know that and know your limits for how much you can put in there. Digestibility, so how easy is it for those pigs to digest that ingredient? And then, of course, ingredient cost. So in my day-to-day job, when I'm formulating diets, I'm always trying to typically do a least cost. So get a diet where I can use the ingredients and then get it to that producer at the lowest cost possible. So ingredient cost is definitely a big one. So pig body condition score kind of goes with nutrition because you want to know if the pigs are in good shape or not. And so where this really comes into play is with sows, because your animals that are going to market are going to be fed as much food as they want. They will always have feed in front of them, so they will eat and however much they want. Sows, when they are actually in gestation, so they haven't given birth yet, are limit fed. So they only get fed a couple pounds a day. And so that number of pounds that they're fed needs to be adjusted based on their body condition score. And this is something that a lot of people at farms don't always do as much as they should. So it's really, really good to know what the body condition score is of sows. And I've talked about in other animals too. Because if she's too thin, it's going to affect her litter. If she's too fat, it's going to affect her litter. So you really want to make sure that you're having that correct before she goes into farrowing. So this just shows you what that looks like. So they're typically on a 1 to 5 scale. You can find other scales. There's probably like a 1 to 7. There's a lot of different scales, but typically the one that's used is a 1 to 5. So 1 would be like super thin. 3 would be your ideal. 4 wouldn't be terrible, but you would kind of definitely want it more towards a 3. And then 5 is going to be like very fat, obese. And I actually see a lot of those. I have one customer I work with who actually uses a lot of milk byproduct to feed to his pigs because a milk company has a lot of extra, and his sows love it, and they're extremely fat. So it's kind of skewed my ability to do body condition score because I'm so used to seeing these fat animals. So now you've probably heard me use a couple of terms like farrowing that you may not know what that means if you haven't been around pigs. So I'm going to kind of go through the different stages of production. So farrowing is basically the act of giving birth. So at farrowing is when the sow is giving birth, and then this kind of says birth to weaning, so you can kind of think of it that way. But basically, farrowing is the event of giving birth, and then kind of from birth to weaning is kind of the pre-weaning period. So this period lasts about 21 days, not the period of her giving birth. That will only take like probably a few hours. But they're in there with their mom for 21 days in the pre-weaning period. So that's about 3 weeks. Sows and gilts. So sows are going to be your pigs that it's like at least their second litter. Gilts are animals that have not had a litter yet, so it's going to be her first litter. And so they're still, even once they have that first litter, they're still considered gilts in the barn for that first litter. But a gilt is one that hasn't had a litter yet, and a sow is one that has had a couple of litters already. So if you think about a heifer versus a cow, it's the same thing. So they're moved to what's called a farrowing barn when they're ready to give birth, or farrow. And so they're going to be put in farrowing crates. And so usually a sour gilt will have 12 to 13 pigs per litter. So like I said, this slide's a little bit more updated on the piglet number. And like I said, some of them will have even more than that. So they're moved from the gestation barn into the farrowing room where they'll have farrowing crates that are all prepared for them. They'll have heat lamps like you see in this picture above the piglets, because you want to maintain a good environment that's warm for the piglets, but then the room temperature can't be too hot because you don't want the sow getting too hot. So pigs are typically 2 to 3 pounds at birth. I'd say you really definitely want them to be on the 3-pound side. And then sows will nurse the piglets until they are weaned, which means like they're weaned, they're taken off of her milk at about 21 days of age. And so that's a good number to know. So typically what I see in the industry is 21 days is definitely the standard. Some people will go a little bit less, which is not always great. And then some people will actually leave them a little bit longer. I know like Smithfield, I think weans theirs at like day 26. And so that just gives them kind of a little bit more time with mom, a little more time for their digestive enzymes to start developing before they have to transition over to another diet. And so typically you want pigs that are 13 to 15 pounds at weaning. I'd say typically you're going to see a lot of them industry-wide around that 13 mark. And then actually some from my farm that has the milk, my customer's farm that has the milk, they actually typically get about a 14. So they have fatter sows, but they're kind of getting it back a little bit on the weight of the pigs. So it's kind of all, I don't know, I guess you have to kind of figure out where you're getting stuff and where you're losing stuff and how it all equals out. So, yeah, do you have a question? Somebody have a question? No? Okay. So the next stage of production after they're weaned is called the nursery. And so this is going to last for about 6 to 8 weeks where they're going to be in the nursery. So they'll be moved there once they've been taken off their mom. This could be a nursery that is at the same site as the sow farm, or they could be taken on a truck and taken to an off-site nursery. It just depends on the system. So they'll be moved to either a nursery or to a wean to finish barn where they're just going to stay there. If they're moved off-site, they may stay there until they go to market. And so they're going to be housed with piglets from other litters. So this is a very stressful event. Weaning is the biggest stressor in a pig's life because they're moved off their mom. They could be transported on a truck, taken to a new farm, and mixed with pigs from other litters all in the same day. So it's a really big deal. And then they have to nutritionally go from a milk diet to a corn and soybean meal dry diet. So it's a lot of stress there. So especially as a nutritionist, we really have to be careful with that period of the pig's life because it takes them a little while to come up on feed. So in the rooms, you'll have specialized temperature controls and ventilation to support the newly weaned piglets because ventilation is a huge thing. I don't even work with ventilation, and I've met a ventilation specialist the other day and learned way more about ventilation than I ever thought existed. So it's a big deal. And for chickens as well, I'm sure you know that if you have chicken houses, ventilation is a big deal, and temperature controls. So piglets are going to be fed a corn soybean meal diet, and they'll typically eat like 1.4 to 4 pounds per day, and that's once they start eating. It's not uncommon for the first few days after they're weaned for them not to eat. And a lot of times, surprisingly, what you'll actually see is that the larger pigs actually may not eat fast. You would kind of think, oh, well, they're bigger, they're going to do better, right? They'll come up on feed. But if you think about it, they were actually the piglets that were getting the most milk. So sometimes those bigger pigs that look the healthiest have the hardest time adjusting because they were getting so much more milk than the other piglets. So it's kind of a little counterintuitive because you would think the larger ones would have a better transition, I guess. So in this phase, pigs are going to grow to about 50 to 60 pounds. So by the end of that 6 to 8 weeks, you want them to be about 50 to 60 pounds. Typically, I'd say right now, most of my producers are aiming for 50. So they kind of have their whole system set up to, they come out of the nursery at about 13, 14 pounds. They come out of, farrowing, pre-weaning at 13, 14 pounds. Then they come out of the nursery at about 50 pounds, and they're going to go to a finisher. So, like I said, there are some challenges in the nursery. Weaning is very stressful. So there's environmental stress, which is because you have a new environment. They're not with their mom. They're in a completely different building. They could be at a different farm. So there are all these new pathogens that they're going to be exposed to that weren't at the farm that they were at or the room that they were in. There's also physiological stress. So you're going to have that diet changing from a liquid to a solid diet. And then going from milk to corn and soybean meal. You're also, because of that, you're going to have lower feed intake, and typically you'll have diarrhea, especially in the first few days after you wean them. It's not uncommon to see that at all, because their digestive enzymes have not fully kicked in yet, so they have a little trouble digesting the corn and soybean meal diet at first. And then there's the social stress because they're removed from the sow, so they're taken away from their mom, and then they're exposed to new piglets. And pigs are very smart animals, so they can recognize their litter mates, and they know if they're put in a pen with someone that they haven't, or a pig they haven't seen before. And it's actually really interesting. When I was doing my research trials, we would actually see that piglets, we would kind of sort them, based on weight and things like that, so that we could do the research properly. And you would come in and check the pens, and they would be in different pens because they would actually jump around and reassort themselves back to their litters. And so they're very aware of things like that. So if they're exposed to new piglets, it can be extremely stressful. You can have some fighting. And so it's a really stressful time just overall. So after the nursery, they're going to go into what is called the growing and finishing phase. And so if you're around hog producers now, I learned about the grower finishing phase, but by the time I got out of school, and that was this past December, now they're kind of just calling it the finisher phase. So just know that if you hear growing and finishing, that they're kind of considering that the same thing now. So it used to kind of be that growing was kind of just all the way up until about 200 pounds, and then finishing was just that last little bit before they go to market. But now a lot of producers are just saying nursery, and then, they're in the finisher. So just so you kind of are aware of that. So the growing finishing phase, or the finishing phase, is typically 16 to 17 weeks. So the pigs will be moved from the nursery to a finishing barn, which is going to be a lot larger to accommodate their continued growth because they're going to get a lot bigger. If there's a setup where the pigs are at a wean to finish barn, then they'll stay there the entire time from the nursery. So it just depends on the setup that they have. In this phase, pigs will typically consume 6 to 10 pounds of feed a day. And remember, I said in this phase, they're going to have feed in front of them all the time. So they will eat as much as they want or as little as they want. But that's typically about how much they'll eat. Their diet typically consists of, again, corn and soybean meal, as well as vitamins and minerals to make sure that they are getting all of their nutritional requirements met. And then as the pigs grow, they'll be monitored daily to make sure that they're healthy. Any pigs that are not healthy or pigs that are injured will be removed and sent to a cull market or euthanized if they need to be, if it's really to that point. So at about 6 months of age, the pigs will weigh around 280 pounds, and then they will be ready to go to market. And so 280 is definitely kind of the average benchmark. It depends on which processing plant you're sending the pigs to. Some want lighter pigs, some want maybe pigs that are a little bit more than 280. So if you are a hog producer, you just need to know what the rules are for where you're sending it, because you will get docked for having pigs under what they want and over what they want. So you would think, oh, well, I have a pig that's a lot heavier, so I'm going to get extra money for that. That's not the case, because they know that consumers want a certain size of like a pork tenderloin, or they want a certain size ham, and all of these things go into the size animal that they want based on the market demands. So if you send a heavier animal, their equipment may not be set up very well to handle that large of an animal, and you're going to have like an excessive size like ham or something that no one's going to buy. So bigger is not always better. So producers really want to try to meet the mark of whatever processing plant they're sending their animals to. You might have any questions on that? So far? Okay. So the U.S. pork industry continues to experience rapid change and growth to meet worldwide consumer demand for what's become the world's most popular meat product. And so in the U.S., it's not exactly the most popular. Chicken still rules all. But it is very, very popular throughout the world, especially in Asian countries. Pork is like the number one thing they eat. So it's a really, really big deal. American pork producer is key to continued growth in the U.S. pork industry. So hog producers are working like everyone else in every other industry to become more efficient through modern production practices, innovations, and then scientific advancements in technology. So they're always trying to kind of stay on the cusp of things because more things come out, and they need to make sure that if a new technology comes out that can really help them become more efficient, that they need to try to implement that. So the structure of the pork industry has changed a little bit over the past 30 to 40 years. The number of U.S. farms that are raising hogs has actually gone down, but the average inventory, so the number of hogs per farm, has increased. So basically you just have fewer farms now, but you have more pigs on those fewer farms. So Iowa is a leading state in pig production. Like I mentioned, the Midwest is where the corn belt is. That's where all the corn is, so it makes sense since corn is like 60 to 70% of their diet that you would raise pigs close to where the corn is. So Iowa's a big one. They're number one. They've been number one for a long time. North Carolina is actually number two in the whole country for pork production, which is why Hurricane Florence hitting us was a really, really big deal. Because then after North Carolina, all the rest of the top producers are back in the Midwest. So North Carolina just kind of has this area where they've been able to raise a lot. You have Smithfield there. And so they're number two, which is really surprising considering that, you know, every other state that's a really big producer is in the Midwest. So pork production has increased 1.5% per year over the past 75 years, and the annual production per sow has increased at the rate of 3.5% since 1960. And I'm not going to ask you to like know those percentages. So the top pork states in the U.S., which I actually just hit on, but just so you can kind of see where they're located, Iowa, which is right there. So you can see like those are minor livestock area or major. Then you have North Carolina, and as you can see on the map, literally like pretty much all of them are in the eastern part of the state, where all the flooding is happening right now, which is not good. And then number three, you have Minnesota, so we're back up here. And then Illinois and then Indiana are going to be your 4 and 5. So all in the Midwest except this area in North Carolina. And I will say there are pigs in other places. There are pigs in Montana. There are pigs. I have some pigs that I work with that are in Georgia and Alabama. South Carolina, I have some that are kind of over here in North Carolina, actually in the mountains. So they're kind of all over, but those are just the top areas where you're going to find most of the pig production in the U.S. So the top pork producing companies, of course, Smithfield Foods, I'm sure most of you have heard of. They're now actually owned by a company from China. So they are a Chinese company, and 80% of their pork that they produce actually goes to China. It's probably more now because China has the African swine fever, and so their production is way down. So we're going to probably have to export a lot more of our meat. Triumph Foods is another one. Seaboard Foods is number 3. Iowa Select Farms is number 4, and then Prestige Farms in North Carolina is number 5, and they're a really, really big deal, not just for pigs but for poultry as well. Actually, at NC State, the Poultry Science Department is like the Prestige Department of Poultry Science, so they're a pretty big deal. As far as export markets, the ability to expand exports has been a great success story for the U.S. pork industry. Like I said, because a lot of it's going to China. There's been an increase in annual pork exports from 1990 to 2006, and I would say that's still going up. The U.S. pork industry remains globally competitive. We're number 2 globally for pork production after China. However, like I said, this African swine fever is such a big deal that those numbers may even shift because they are losing a lot of pigs really fast. So we're really hoping that it doesn't make it over here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the production facilities that pigs are typically kept in. So they're kept in total confinement in intensive production systems. So they're kept in houses, kind of like chickens are. They're kept in a controlled system. So that would be the majority of pigs in the U.S. Of course, you're going to have some pigs that people have, in their backyard or in a pen somewhere at their house that are not a huge commercial operation. So this is for the majority of pigs. They're going to be in a constant controlled environment. So like we talked about the temperature controls and ventilation, it's crazy how much goes into that. Like if it reaches a certain temperature, the curtains lower a little bit, and like it's all very, very controlled. So you maximize the use of a large capital investment because it does cost a lot to build these farms. So you want to make sure that everything is ready to go so that you can have hogs in and out of there for a really long time. Use of specialized labor, and then improved marketing opportunities are some other good things. So this is just a picture of what your typical pig barn would look like. And so this picture on the top left is probably one that you would see more in the Midwest because it's got this wall is kind of closed off. And then you've got all of this open, and then you have like kind of some ventilation on the sides. Typically in North Carolina, what we'll see is what's called tunnel ventilated housing. So this will be open, and it'll have a curtain here that will drop or raise based on the temperature, and then you'll have fans at the other end that will pull that air through. And that's because it gets a lot hotter down here, and these farms are a lot older. Like that one you can kind of tell is a newer farm. So a lot of the older ones in North Carolina will look a little bit different, but that's typically what you would see. And then on the inside, you're just going to have an aisle here, and then you'll have different feeders. So it could look different depending on whatever the farmer chooses, and then you'll just have pens of the pigs there. Just kind of give you a look inside. So production facilities, another facility that you could have would be a low investment outdoor production system or other alternatives to that. So that would be a system used by many like small to mid-sized producers that don't want to make the big investment of having all these houses and having a lot of pigs. So that accounts for a very small percentage of pigs that are produced in the U.S. So you have a lower capital investment in your buildings and equipment because you're not going to have as much. They're not going to be completely kept inside. The system is very flexible that way and really easy to modify, as opposed to a building that you've built, it's there, you've got everything in place. That's going to be very costly if you have to go in and change something. There's less dependence on mechanical equipment, which could be a good thing if mechanical equipment fails and you don't really have to worry about all of that mechanical equipment. However, there are some not so good aspects of environmentally regulated buildings like odor and manure handling. And so those can be fairly avoided pretty well with some of the smaller mid-sized producers because you don't have quite as many pigs in one area and all of that waste to deal with in one area. So genetics and crossbreeding, like I said, genetics is obviously a big deal. That's how we make a lot of our advancements is through genetics. And so crossbreeding, like I said, any pig that you're going to see commercially is going to market is going to be a crossbred animal of some sort. They're going to have a lot of different breeds in there. So the primary swine breeding system used in the U.S. is the terminal crossbreeding system. So I kind of mentioned that a little bit earlier. So the terminal sire lines, so the father, is going to be selected for growth efficiency, muscle content, and their meat quality traits, which we talked about. And then those will be mated to specialized maternal lines that are then selected for reproductive performance. So you're going to have a cross of all of these traits kind of coming together. So this is just kind of a little like diagram to kind of show you how this works. So you would have like maternal breed 1. So this could be like a landrace. You could have maternal breed 2, be a Yorkshire, and you're going to cross those animals. So then you get this maternal cross female who's a crossbred of both of those maternal lines. And so then you're going to mate her to a terminal boar, so like your Duroc, and that's going to give you your market hog. And so then that animal is going to be, like, if that's a purebred Duroc, that animal would have 3 different breeds in it. A lot of animals going to market have even more than that. But so this is just kind of a simple way to kind of show you how that works. So the U.S. swine seed stock industry or breeding stock companies are made up of breeding stock companies or independent seed stock producers. And so they will produce and market specialized terminal and maternal boars and gilts selected over generations for economic importance. So boars are just going to be your males that have not been castrated. And then gilts are, again, the females that haven't had a litter yet. So once they have been castrated, the males are called a barrow. So when you see boar, that's an intact male that's going to be used to produce semen. So they have selected these animals over generations for traits that are economically important, like growth and maternal traits. So animal waste and nutrient management programs are extremely important. The management of manure that's produced by swine operations is critical in the swine industry. If you saw anything on the news, maybe not in Virginia, but down here, everybody was worried with Florence that the lagoons were going to flood and that manure and waste was going to get into all the water systems and it was going to be this big mess. Luckily, that hasn't happened yet, but it has been a problem in the past. So management of manure is extremely important for swine operations. Larger facilities means more manure concentrated in one place. So you're going to have more potential for environmental problems due to air and groundwater pollution. And so manure can actually be an asset for crop production because it returns valuable nutrients to the soil, which lowers your need for a commercial fertilizer. But you really have to be careful because of the smell and like I've probably mentioned already, the lawsuits that are going on in North Carolina right now, that's actually been a big problem, is people living close to fields that are sprayed with this waste. So it can be good in certain areas as long as you don't have angry neighbors that are complaining. So for waste management systems, you have to have a timely collection of manure. Can't have it like just sitting around forever because that's going to be gross. Adequate waste treatment or storage. Typically what you're going to have is a lot of lagoons, which are just basically look like big nasty ponds where all the waste is going to go. So you want to have maximum utilization and management of nutrients. And so what that means is that, like, as a nutritionist, we formulate the diet so that we're not giving them too much of something, more than they can digest, because then that's just going to be excreted into their waste. So if we know that they have a capacity for a certain amount of phosphorus, we feed to that capacity, because anything extra that we feed is going to get excreted in their feces, and then you've got more phosphorus in the environment. So that's kind of what that means by management utilization of nutrients. So waste handling, typically these pig houses will have slotted floors with really deep pits. So that's really popular in the total confinement system. And so it'll just kind of go down in the pits, and then you'll have like water come under it and flush it all out into the lagoon. These flush systems with large lagoons, here's a picture, you can see it, are used especially in the southeast. So like I was saying, this is typically what I see at most of the producers that I visit, is the large lagoon. So contract production is how a lot of hog producers operate. And so that is a specified relationship between the growers, which would be the swine producers, and the owners, which would be the contractors or the integrators. So the contractors provide certain inputs like the feeder pigs feed, transportation, veterinary care, and then the growers will actually provide the facilities, the utilities, and the labor to raise those animals. So the facilities and the buildings are owned by the grower, but the contractor owns the animals. And then the grower will make the grower will make their money off of like how many animals come through, how many pounds leave. It just depends on the system. I've seen it done a lot of different ways, how they actually determine what that person gets paid, whether it's number out or pounds out or whatever. So the contractors retain ownership of the pigs, so they bear most of the involved risk, and then they compensate growers on a fee-for-service agreement based on the value per pig produced. So like I said, that could be like the number of pigs that you manage to get out, the pounds that you get out, what your average daily gain number is. I've seen it done a lot of different ways. So it just depends on what that agreement is that both parties come to for how they're going to do that. So the industry future, there is a trend towards larger production. Like I said, fewer farms, but more pigs on the farms that you have. And this is likely to continue as more technology and modern facilities and the economics of scaling it have made production more efficient, and the production of a large number of pigs at one location more feasible. So then, of course, you still have to consider the problems related to the disposal of all the manure from all these animals in one place, environmental control, and then also proximity to the human population will limit industry growth in parts of the country. And I'm sad to say that that is definitely happening here in North Carolina with these lawsuits, even though the hog farms were there first. But obviously you can't go build a hog farm just anywhere because it's going to smell. So these are all things that we have to take into account moving forward. That's the end of my pig lecture. So does anybody have any questions? I know that was a lot, and I talk a lot about pigs. So if you have any questions or you feel a little overwhelmed, feel free to email me. If you have any questions, for those of you that have gotten your test back, I am going to post a key after Friday, after the online students have finished taking it, obviously. So you'll be able to see. I tried to kind of write on there which answer was correct for some of them, but I tell I was using like a computer program, so my writing is like me clicking on stuff, so it's really horrible. So if you can't tell like what I meant or something, or you have questions about what you missed, let me know, and then the key will be up for the answers that I didn't actually mark on your test, so that you can see what the correct answer would be. And then feel free to email me if you have any questions.
Jonathan had a question about something.
Yeah.
When you get to the slide about the scale, like how big the pigs are, how would you correct the overweight pig diet and stuff?
Oh, like the body conditions scale? So if she's an overweight pig, basically the only time that you're going to want to correct that is if she's in gestation, like I said, when you're really going to use that. So the way to correct that is what we typically want people to do is when they first come out of farrowing, so their pigs have been weaned and they come back into gestation. And those first couple of days, we want them to assess their body condition score, and if she's overweight, then drop the amount of feed that she's getting per day. Because those animals are limit fed, so they're not on just however much they can eat. They're actually separate individual feeders in front of each animal. And so the people at the farm are responsible for increasing the amount of feed they get or lowering it based on their body condition. So if you see one that's overweight, you want to start lowering her feed amount. Another thing that we do is like the farm that gets, we have some farms that get milk. So we actually make a lower energy diet for those sows because the milk has so much fat in it. So we you can think of it as decreasing the calories that are in the dry feed that we give them, so that they kind of still feel full, but they're getting less calories from that dry feed. So that's just kind of something, but basically it's just management on the farm and adjusting their feeder to the amount of feed they're getting. And if she's overweight, you're just going to drop a pound off of what you're feeding her per day until she starts losing the weight, and then you just manage it that way. Any other questions? Yeah, kind of along those lines too with the milk, like the milk actually comes out at one end. And so what you'll see is that the sows closest to where it comes out of will actually try to squirt it all up at the end, and they'll get super fat. And then you have the thin sows down at the end because they're not getting as much. So another way in those farms that you could kind of fix that is by moving that fat sow to the end and changing her out with a thin sow and put the thin sow up where the milk is first coming out. So just depending on the system, but the main way is just cutting back feed. Anything else? Everybody ready to raise pigs now?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Why? But if you do, I'll be your nutritionist. All right. Well, if nobody has any other questions, then that's all I have. I will be in Pennsylvania all next week, so I'm gonna check the lectures and see if the recorded lectures match up. If they don't, then I'll re-record some and I'll send them to you, Tom.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll definitely. I have to work with a producer in Pennsylvania this week, so I won't be available Monday or Wednesday.
Okay. Well, have fun.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.